This painting is such a delicate painting, and you are going to be surprised on how easy it is to paint this delicate doily. I suggest that you watch this whole video first before you start to paint. The only thing that you are going to use your Misket on today are the tails on the radishes. We're going to be using burnt umber today. We're going to be using our black. We're going to be using indigo blue. We are going to be using violet or purple, whichever you have. We're going to be using alizarin crimson or any rose color that you have. We are also going to be using some burnt sienna. And we will be using sap green. We're also going to be using Chinese white at the end. We're going to be using our regular table salt. We are going to be using your Misket or your masking agent. The brushes, we're going to use a large 2-inch flat, a 2, 4, and an 8 round. We are also going to be using a number 1 rigger and your fine liner. Now for your drawing, you want to definitely have your little creamer drawn, and you want to have the larger sections of your doily drawn. The full color linen sections, not the real fine lines, but you want to have those bigger sections drawn in so that when we do draw in those fine lines, you'll know exactly where to draw them. We are going to be drawing in those lines almost like a checkerboard pattern all around the paper, but we're going to be doing it like section by section because we're going to be painting in between all of these lines, almost like you're painting in between a frame. It's very tedious. It is very time consuming, but the end result is wonderful. And it surely saves you from trying to misket those big areas of the lighter parts of the lacy doily. So you're going to be drawing those in, and you want to leave enough space between those lines because you're going to be painting in between all of that. And if you put those lines too close together, you're going to have too many to paint, and it's going to be too difficult to paint. So you want to leave your squares that you're creating, your little squares, big enough that you're going to be able to paint in a little square within that area. Now, after you get one section drawn in, that's going to be your starting point. But what we're going to do is with some watered down burnt umber, we are going to paint over the whole picture except for the radishes and the little creamer. But the rest of the picture is going to have a very pale wash of burnt umber on it. So we're going to be painting in that whole section, everything but the radishes and the creamer. And then when we are finished with that, we're going to throw a little bit of salt on. So you can paint a little bit, and then you can salt a little bit, and paint a little bit, and salt a little bit, so that your paint doesn't actually start to dry on you. You don't want it to dry on you. You want it to have a nice evenness to it. However, if you do get some hard lines, it's really not going to matter because we're going to be painting over other things also. So you want to go ahead and you can paint over everything but the radishes, and that includes the radish leaves and the little creamer. Everything else gets that nice wash of watered down umber on it, and then you're going to throw some salt on it. Now, if you do paint over some of your radish leaves, it's fine because this color is so pale, it's really not going to matter. But if you do remember and you can omit painting the radish leaves, then leave them nice and clean and white also. Now you want to allow everything to dry and you will want to allow your salt to work before you do the next step. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to make sure it's super dry. You can brush off some of that salt or most of it. And we are going to start painting in now our little squares. You're going to be using a more intense umber mixed with some black, and you're going to paint in the inside of those squares. You're going to leave a little frame around each one of what the paper looks like now. So take a minute, look at what I'm doing so that you understand you're leaving a little white square around each dark square that you're painting in. That little white square is actually your crocheted doily, and you are leaving that. Okay, you are just painting in your dark squares now in the center of each one of those squares you just drew, and you're going to paint those all in. We're going to let it dry, and then we're going to move on to another section and draw those squares and paint those squares until we have the whole thing done. Now we're only doing the thin crocheted parts, the little square parts. We're not doing the linen parts of the doily yet. We are only doing the real see-through whole part, holy part of the doily, not the linen parts that are more dense in material. So we're going to move all the way around the doily, drawing in and painting in our little holes. When you are drawing and painting, you want to make sure that you have your doily lines, your checkerboard lines going in the same direction. You don't want some to be going horizontally and vertically at an angle and then move to the next section and have them straight up and down and straight across. They have to all be going basically the same way because as this doily is made, it's made all the same way. So you don't want to be flip-flopping your lines around. Now, after you're finished painting in this section, you're going to move on to a different section. It doesn't matter where you go. You can go to the top, you can go to the left, you can go to the right, but we are only painting in the sections now and drawing those sections in that have the little squares. This is the fine crocheted part of the doily. We are not doing the big linen parts yet. This is just the fine crocheted parts. You want to make sure your lineage is going in the same direction, and you're going to be painting it in with the same color, which is a black mixed with your umber, and it's basically the table color because you're seeing the table through all of these holes. You're going to continue to do this all the way around your picture. Make sure you are following your picture so that you know what sections actually get painted in with this fine crocheted lines. You should have your bigger linen sections drawn in, so don't let those confuse you. We are not painting those yet. We are just painting in all of the small squares that you see in your picture. Now, after you are done painting in all of your little squares, you are going to be basically halfway there. It's very tedious, but it's going to make your picture look beautiful. Once you are done with that, then we are going to go to the top of the picture and we are going to use that same color and paint that in where it's solid. That is the table. That's the color of the table that you see through all of your little squares. And now this is just a bigger section of the table that the doily is not on. So we're going to paint that in with that solid color of umber mixed with a little bit of black. There's a section on the left and a section on the right. That does not get salted. That is just the solid table, so we are not salting that. The reason we salted the other parts was because we wanted some texturing on the linen. We don't want texturing on the table. Once you've finished painting your table, you want to allow that to dry because we're going to be working on the big linen parts now. And you don't want to paint wet against wet. So you want to make sure your table parts that you just painted are dry. The color that we're going to be using on the big linen parts is that same color but much more watered down. So it's still going to be a little bit of umber and a little bit of black, but it has a good bit of water to it. And if you look at your picture, you'll be able to see the big design that is painted in on each of those sections. Just take section by section and paint in what you see on those bigger linen parts. Once you get all of those designs painted in with that watered down black and burnt umber, then we're going to go back and we are going to be drawing and painting in the actual whole parts, whole as in HOLE, holes in the linen sections. Again, if you look at your picture, you'll see that there are some lines of those crocheted holes in the linen sections. If you feel that you want to sketch those in first with a pencil, then please do that so that you don't make a mistake. But if you feel confident enough that you can just go ahead in and paint the squares, then you can do that also. But there is no problem if you feel that you should sketch those lines in first so that you have a guide as to where you're going to be painting those squares. It's entirely up to you. But each one of those linen sections has sections of the crocheted holes. Now, after you get through all of your linen sections and you have your holes painted in, the crocheted holes, then you want to make sure everything is really nice and dry, because we're going to move on and we're going to put on our first wash on our radishes. You also want to make sure that you have your salt handy, because you're going to be using your salt for this part of the radishes. This is already looking like such a delicate picture. You can really feel the crocheting in this doily. When we start on our radishes, we are going to be working just with one color right now. That color is going to be put on after we wet the top portion of the radish. So you're going to wet the top portion with just water, and then you are going to paint on a nice wash of indigo blue. You're going to allow that paint to hit that upper section of the water so that it bleeds into the water. You don't want to paint the top section of the radish. You just want that blue to bleed into the plain water. And then you're going to throw on a little bit of salt. You are going to do the other two radishes exactly the same way. Just wet the top and paint the bottom, bringing that paint up into the water. Once dry, remove the salt, and we are going to put the second wash on, which is going to be alizarin crimson. You're going to be painting that right over the indigo. You're going to paint the whole radish, obviously not the leaves, and your tails are still misketed. You're going to leave them misketed. We'll paint them later. But you're going to paint the whole radish with that alizarin crimson. And that alizarin crimson is nice and intense. You don't want it to be like a light pink. You want it to be nice and intense. And you'll be painting all three of the radishes the same way. Now that we are finished with the radishes, we're going to start to work on the creamer. I'm doing this on a small sheet of paper for you first so that you can understand what you need to do and you don't have all of the other stuff around it to look and make it be a little bit more confusing for you. You want to put in all of the dark things that you see on this creamer. Not the picture, not the design, the picture, but all of the dark sections of the creamer. And it has to be done really wet so that you do not get hard lines on this. Your lines should all be blended together so that this looks like one big shadowed creamer. No hard lines. There are some sections that are going to be a little bit darker than the rest, but that's going to be done when the paint is wet so that it'll have a nice soft blend to it. If you really need to lightly mark these sections in with a pencil, then please do, but just use really light lines so that you're not going to see pencil lines through this. But I really think if you look at your picture and you understand where the darker parts are, you'll be able to do it without a problem. The hardest thing is going to be doing it wet enough that you're not going to have hard lines where your paint is going to dry on you and then you're going to go over it again with wet. But if you can keep your paint nice and wet, you should not have a problem with this. There's a good bit of it shadowed in, but those white sections are really important to keep white. The only really dark section is down inside the creamer. So while my opening is painted and nice and wet, I'm putting in some much more intense indigo down in where the hole, where the neck of the creamer would be, and then just blending it out with my brush. Do not dip in water. If you dip in water, you're going to change the whole ratio of the paint. Just dip back into your original light wash to soften your edge, but don't dip into your water. Don't dip into your water the entire time you're doing this. Just keep going back to your original watered down indigo color. Do not go into your water. You will change the ratio of paint water and you will get a washback or a big bloom in your coloring. So just keep going into the paint that you have mixed on your palette. Remember, you want to keep these nice white spots. This is where the light is hitting, and you want to keep those. You don't want to lose those. You also want to make sure that the way the light is hitting your creamer helps to shape the creamer. So don't be drawing straight up and down lines on the bellies and the sides of the creamer. You want those sections to be arched in the direction of the creamer. If you have to, watch this whole section first so that you know exactly what you should be doing. take your time with the creamer. That's the main part of the middle of the picture, and you don't want to, to mess it up. Now, where you have your design on your creamer, if you have one at all. If you don't have one, that's perfectly fine. But unless the flowers or whatever your design is going to be on your creamer, you want it to be totally white, then if you want it to be totally white, you should misket it or don't paint over that. But otherwise, if it's darker like the violets or anything like that, you can just paint right over it because it's shadowed anyway. Down at the bottom of the creamer is a reflection of the lace, the crocheted lace, the holes. So that's why there's that spider webby design at the base of the creamer. The rest of the creamer is just going to be shadowed with some of those white light sections, and you want to be sure that you leave those white sections really nice and white. Keep your paint nice and wet so that you don't get hard lines, and do not go back into your water. Just go back into your paint. Make sure that you don't forget to do the handle of the creamer also. That also has some nice shadowed sections. And after you are done with all of these shadowed parts, we're going to let that creamer dry really well before we put on the brassy parts. The highlighted white along the rim will go on totally at the end, okay? So this is what your creamer should be looking like. Now you're going to go back in and we're going to put in a couple of those darker areas, and we'll just blend them off with a little bit of water because now your creamer's already dry, so it doesn't matter. So there's just a couple spots that are darker in color. One of them is on the left, and it's helping to form the roundness of the creamer and also to shadow under the lip of the creamer. The rest will be down the center where the creamer is the darkest because it's picking up some light on both sides. But right down the center, you're not getting as much light. So you're going to have that center section that's going to be just a little bit darker, like another wash of that same color, maybe a little bit more intense, right down the middle. And then once you get that put on, you're just going to use your wet brush and blend off those hard lines with just a little bit of water. But you want to make sure that your pitcher, your little creamer, is nice and dry before you put this second wash, the little bit of a darker wash on. If you feel that your center is not dark enough where it goes down into the inside of your creamer, you can put on another wash of your indigo and then just blend it off with some plain water. I'm going to make the area under my spout, my lipped spout, just a little bit darker, but I want to wait for that to dry first before I go ahead and put on an additional little bit of darkness. But once it's dry, you can put on that little bit of darkness if it's necessary and just blend it off with a wet brush with plain water. If that's not necessary, then you do not need to do that step. But you want to make sure that you have that nice shadow underneath there. Perfect little picture. Now you want to make sure that everything on your picture is really dry, and we're going to work with some burnt sienna to add that little bit of a bronzy color on around the lip of the little creamer and also on the handle. If you look at your picture, you'll be able to see exactly where it is. It goes right along the rim, not the whole way around, and parts of the handle, not the entire handle. But if you look at your picture, you'll know just where you want to put that bronzy, brassy color. Now that's all we're going to be doing on this creamer for now. Once we do some other work on the painting, we'll be going back to the creamer. But this is all that you want to do for right now. Now we're going back to the regular picture. We're going to pretend like you just painted it, or that I just painted it on that picture. And what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be adding the black, deep, dark shadows on that bronze color. You want to follow your picture. It's just a very simple line design. It really isn't anything specific. What it actually is it's the reflection of the crochet doily on that shiny brassy color along the lip. But it just looks black. It looks like some black shapes on the actual handle and on the rim. So follow your picture. It doesn't have to be exact, but you want to have a little bit of a design on that bronzy color because that's what's going to make it interesting. especially the handle. The handle has quite a few dark lines, some shapes, but it makes that handle very interesting looking instead of just a white, ear shaped handle on your creamer. This makes it really interesting. So follow your picture. Again, if you have the need to sketch it with a pencil first, that's fine. Do that. I would rather see you do that until you feel confident enough to do things without sketching it. But I would rather you sketch it than make a mistake and then ruin your painting. So if you feel that you want to sketch in a couple of those lines or all of those lines, please do that. So as you can see, I've painted in some of my leaves already, and now I'm going to paint in the rest of them. I'm just painting them one by one with sap green, and I will add my shadows and my darker colors later, but I'm painting them individually. Sap green, that's the only color I'm using right now. I'm not salting them, I'm not doing anything like that, but any stem or leaf is going to be sap green. Now I'm going to be shadowing my leaves. And again, I'm following my picture. I'm painting either the inside of a leaf or the underside of the leaf with some watered down black. You can mix watered down black with some sap if you would rather have some more green added to it, because now you want to give these leaves a little bit of shape also. You don't want them to look flat. So you're either going to be shadowing the inside of the leaf, the underside of the leaf, or you're going to be shadowing where the leaf overhangs another leaf. And you can see all of that just by looking at your picture or by looking at the photo that you have to work from. But you need to have your leaves shadowed, especially if everything else in the picture is going to be shadowed. You can't have leaves that have no shadows if everything else is shadowed. So take your time, decide where you want to put your shadows. Don't overtake the entire leaf, but you do want to have some nice deep shadows. Now once our shadows are all finished, then we are going to move back to the creamer, but you want to make sure that your leaves are nice and dry. And we're going to start to paint in the picture that we have on the creamer. If you have no picture and you just want it to be a plain white creamer, that is perfectly fine. But if you have a picture, then you want to go ahead and paint it in. You're going to paint it in right over the shadows, because why we did this, instead of painting the design on the creamer and then shadowing it, is because we didn't want to drag the shadow through those nice colors and then have it displace the colors somewhere on the creamer that you might not have wanted it to go, or have it bleed a little bit. This way your colors are going to stay nice and crisp. They're already going to be shadowed, and you don't have to worry about dragging that color somewhere where you didn't want it to be. So you're going to paint in whatever it is you have on your creamer. Again, if you have nothing, that's fine. Then you're just going to leave it as is. But if you have a design, I use the violets again. If you have that design, then you're going to go ahead and paint that in. Just the flowers or whatever, we're going to paint around that to deepen it after this is really nice and dry. Now I've painted in all that I want to paint in with my violets, my little stems, my little leaves, and now I want to deepen the center of that. If you don't want to deepen what you've put on there and you want to leave it as is, you can. But I'm going all around the edge and just in the center part, painting in all of those whites with some watered down black. And then I'm going to go along the edge of that watered down black and soften it with water, so that my little bouquet of violets looks like it's in a deep dark center. If you don't want a dark center, you do not have to put one in. But, what I wanted is I wanted my violets to look like they were, in a grouping. I didn't want it to be like individuals. So I'm deepening the center, and then I am just softening the edge with some water. Again, you don't want to do that until everything is dry. Now, on some of our linens, I want to make it look as if there are some like crochet lines. So I'm just putting in some little thin lines, almost scribbly lines, on any parts of my linen that just look a little bit too clean. Maybe the salt that I put down originally didn't work at all and there's no texturing at all. Well, then I'm going to just go ahead and put them in with my brush. It can be little dots, it can be little lines. You can repaint it and salt it again if it's too plain. But I just want to have a couple little texture markings so that it just doesn't look too clean. Now, before I do my shadowing on my painting, my big shadowing, I'm taking the biscuit off of the tails on my radishes because I want to paint them in before I do any of the shadowing, because they will be part of the, they will get some shadow on them. So I don't want to have to do all of my shadowing, then take the biscuit off, and then reshadow. So biscuit off. I'm going to use my alizarin crimson, watered down, and I am going to paint my tail nice and wet, just with that watered down crimson. And then where it's attached to the radish, I'm going to put in a little bit of indigo so that it looks more like it's blended right into the radish rather than stuck on with a piece of glue. So take your biscuit off, paint your tail with some watered down alizarin crimson, and then where it meets the radish, while it's wet, you're going to drop in that little tiny bit of indigo. Now we're really getting towards the end of our painting, and we want to put in our deepest, darkest shadows on all of the things in our picture. So we're going to shadow under our creamer first. You want to have a nice rounded shadow on the doily from the creamer, and I'm using some watered down black, not too light, not too dark, but you want to have some shadows on both the bottom of the creamer and the doily. You can put those on individually, and then you're going to just blend off the edge with some water. But you want to have that nice shadow because that's what's really going to pop out the different things in your picture and make it look more three-dimensional and more realistic. There's going to be shadows under the leaves. There's going to be shadows under the radishes, and you can follow your picture to see how to paint those on. Especially with the radishes, you want to have your shadow go along the linen, more like in a straight line, and not follow the whole shape of the radish since it sticks up in the air a little bit. So follow your picture for those shadows. You want to make sure you get the shadows of the leaves on the doily, and you're softening edges just with a wet brush. So follow each individual item that's sitting on your doily, and you're going to shadow each one. And you want to make sure that your shadows coincide to what is there. So you don't want to have a straight edged shadow if you have a rounded object. So you want to make sure that your shadowing coincides with the shape of what it represents. Now I'm taking my shadow also up onto the object a little bit. So you can't have the bottom of your object not shadowed and then have a dark shadow on the table, especially a rounded subject. The underside of that roundness is shadowed. So I did that with my radishes, and I'm going to do that with the bottom of my creamer. Not really dark, but enough of a shadow that you understand that it's a rounded object, and the bottom of the roundness needs to have a shadow. Your shadows can be done a little bit at a time. You can go back and do these shadows anytime. Less is better. You don't want to get carried away and have your nice doily all covered with big heavy shadows. But you need the shadows to show the dimension and to create like a 3D dimension of all of your items on your doily. Shadows are very, very important. If your shadows aren't dark enough, wait for it to dry, and you can always add a little bit more. Less is better because you want to wait for it to dry to see how dark it's going to be once it's dry. But you want to make sure that you do have shadows everywhere where it's necessary. The very last thing that we're going to do now is a little bit of Chinese white, and with a rigger I'm going to go along the rim of my creamer, right on top of the bronzy and the black. Couple little lines and dots, not the whole thing, just where that light is really, really shining on the brass and the black part. And again, it's all on the photo or on the picture that you have of the painting. You'll be able to see exactly where it should go. If there are some parts of your creamer that you painted in shadow that shouldn't have been, you can use that white now to paint those white areas back in. If there's some little doily lines that you painted over and you shouldn't have, you can use your white now to paint those back in. But you're mainly using it for your highlighting. We are also going to be highlighting the very tops of our radishes, and it's not going to be a really intense white. It's going to be more of a matte finish white that's just going to show where some light is touching on those radishes, but it's not a shiny glossy white. You put it on thicker than you would think it needs to be, because remember that Chinese white dries much lighter. So even though that looks like it's really going to dry and be like a white spot, when it dries, it is not. If it does dry too white, all you have to do is re-wet your brush, put it back on that white, and take a little bit off. It's white is very easy to remove. If you have to put more on, you want to wait for the initial white to dry, and then you can redo. But wait for the initial to dry, or you'll just start to create like a pink mud, because you'll just be picking up the red and the white together, and you'll be creating pink instead of a nice white shine. Great painting, wonderful detail, and the highlights really bring out all of the delicateness of this painting. I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed painting it. It was tedious, but very well worth it. So as always, happy painting.